Hello there everyone, welcome to the channel if you're new, welcome back if you aren't, I'm EDJ, and we're going to be covering the 5th part of the Otto von Bismarck series by Extra History. So last time we saw their war with Austria, which went very well for, Prussia, and Otto von Bismarck is basically playing chess with all of Europe, making alliances, ensuring framing wars in a way that other European nations won't interfere with German unification. But now comes a conflict with France, and as we know, France gets completely demolished. But it's gonna be nice to see Otto von Bismarck's, role and how he kind of for the Franco-Prussian War video by Armchair Historian, he essentially plays Napoleon III and, basically gets him into the war that he needs him to get into. So, yeah, this is going to be very interesting for the most part. If you want to watch the original video, the link is down below. With that said, without any further ado, let's watch part 5 of Otto von Bismarck.
Introduce our newest extra history artist, Nick. He'll be taking over for David, who is now hard at work on our new extra sci-fi series. Say hello. Any increase in power brings an increase in enemies. But to Bismarck, enemies were as useful as friends. With the defeat of Austria and the consolidation of the northern German states into one hegemony ruled by Prussia, Bismarck's eye turned to the next problem: founding Germany. But to do this, he would need to bring all of the southern German states under his control. He knew he couldn't simply annex them by force. He needed a unified Germany, a Germany that felt like a country, not some occupied territory under a foreign rule. And for that, the southern German states would have to come to him willingly, of their own volition. But they had always been aligned with Austria, so how could he get them to volunteer to be absorbed into Prussia? He would need an external threat, something that would make these states more afraid of other nations, and see Prussia as the benevolent protector and cultural brother that they could turn to in their time of need. And what better enemy than France? Napoleon III, who had been willing to stand by and let Prussia pick off its neighbors back when it was a minor power, suddenly woke up and realized that a power to rival France had just emerged on its border. Already upset about the fact that he hadn't gotten any territory as a bribe for staying neutral in the war between Prussians and Austrians, Napoleon was primed and ready for a conflict with Prussia. But there was a problem. Both Prussia and France needed the other one to be the aggressor. Neither wanted to risk international rebuke or the possibility of foreign intervention in their cause. But Bismarck had a plan. Bismarck always had a plan. His plan was wait until circumstances presented themselves that allowed him to formulate an advantageous plan. So he did. Then, when the Queen of Spain was suddenly kicked out of Spain by revolutionaries, Bismarck knew it was go time. Because when a European monarch vacates their throne, there is always a multinational scramble for succession. In this case, you'd think it would be less complicated because the Spanish kicked out their monarch and were essentially choosing a new one for themselves instead of trying to untangle and war over some Byzantine genealogical tree. But no, they instead decided to offer the crown of Spain to a German prince. Bismarck was all for this. He pushed for Prince Leopold to accept the offer, despite the fact that his name didn't even have Wilhelm in it anywhere. He knew full well that Napoleon III would have to rage against this offer. After all, if Spain ever allied with Prussia, which would be far more likely with a Prussian prince on the Spanish throne, France would be surrounded. King Wilhelm was against this, and even Prince Leopold didn't see great prospects in being king of a country that had spent most of the last century in revolt, but Bismarck's diplomacy prevailed, and the offer was accepted. All of these dealings were kept a very close secret, though. If France found out too early, the consequences could be disastrous. What Bismarck needed was for Leopold to be proclaimed king by the legitimate assembly of the people of Spain before Napoleon could make a move. That way, if France declared war over it, the world would see them as the aggressors. Everything went perfectly. On June 19th, 18...
This man is a mastermind. He is playing 5D chess, and no one is on his level. No one is seeing through him, man. And Man, the way he plays Napoleon the Third is just genius. Like, he gets everything he wants, and like, wow. Just wow. Talk about a very intelligent and cunning man.
1870, Leopold agreed to accept the throne. 2 days later, he sent a coded telegraph to Madrid saying that he would arrive around the 29th. But then history turned, as it so often does, on a small thing. A cipher clerk made an error in decoding the message and wrote the 9th of July. The Spanish legislature couldn't be held in session that long, and thus was dismissed on June 23rd, which meant that when Leopold arrived in Spain, there was nobody present to make him king. People started noticing this Prussian prince kicking around in Madrid fairly quickly, and word reached the French papers. Soon, all of France was up in arms. So, not everything went perfectly. But Bismarck now played the spider, waiting silently. He knew that he couldn't be seen directing affairs. All he had to do was wait for the French to offer some insult, and then pounce on that to have the war he wanted. But he didn't factor in Wilhelm. The king had always been opposed to the prince running off and taking the Spanish throne, so when the French outcry flared up, the Prussian monarch put his foot down and told Leopold to withdraw his nomination. This was a huge diplomatic win for France, but like always, Napoleon III pushed it too far. He sent a diplomat to ask Wilhelm to swear that no Hohenzollern would ever sit on the Spanish throne. The king found this mildly insulting, as there was no way he would promise something like that in perpetuity, and
Yeah, that seems a little wild, Napoleon the Third. Just take the W, Napoleon. Stop pushing it. Oh man. Typical Bonaparte, right? Always pushing their victories until it backfires on their face. Oh man. But yeah, he probably should have left it alone.
besides, he had already pulled Leopold from the throne, and it wasn't likely to come up again. He felt that he had already been perfectly reasonable about this. So he replied that he could promise no such thing, and sent the French ambassador away. Then he had a quick telegram sent to Bismarck relaying the incident and granting him permission to inform the press. But Bismarck always had a way with vague instructions, and with words. He did indeed inform the press, but the message he passed along to them was carefully edited. It wasn't false, per se. It wasn't even really a misrepresentation. He just omitted some words. Omitted some words in such a brilliant way that when the German people read it, they would think the French ambassador had insulted their king. And when the French read it, they would think that the Prussian king had insulted their ambassador. That did the trick. The people were up in arms, and the French were ticked. Paris all the more so because, coincidentally, the telegram happened to come out on Bastille Day. And Napoleon III needed a war. His regime was largely unsuccessful, and his foreign entanglements had been a disaster. He thought that if he could crush Prussia and gain territory for France, he would be back on stable footing.
Dang. All has played out according to plan. So yes, Otto von Bismarck once again, with the plan, has gotten everything he wants. Oh my goodness. Just genius.
Soon, hundreds of thousands of French troops were pouring across the Prussian border. Bismarck had his defensive war. The French had invaded, and he had the moral high ground. In response, the southern German states flocked to the Prussian banner, but he played a dangerous game. By letting the French invade the Prussians, he had allowed them to mobilize first. Now the German army had to get into position before their country was overrun. But here, Bismarck had the greatest weapon, Moltke. The French had better rifles than the Germans, but the Germans had better ideas about modern war.
Yeah, also the Prussians, Germans had better artillery, I remember, which played a huge part in their success, even though they took a lot of casualties due to the superior rifles of the French. The artillery basically turned their losses into wins. And yeah, they just had the better understand. It goes to show you just the greatness of artillery, right? That's why Napoleon the First got as far as he did. He saw, wow, artillery is kind of awesome. Like, I'm gonna use it more. Like, you know. And unfortunately, Napoleon III did not learn that lesson from his uncle about the greatness of artillery. And yeah, it did not help in this war.
Russian observers had studied the American Civil War and knew that a train schedule could be as powerful a tool as any gun. Moltke embraced the idea of the railroad and the telegraph. With coordination and these new technologies for movement, he not only got the German army to the front in time, he got more men there than the French did. But he did more than just this. He rewrote the rules so that German units no longer simply marched in great columns and fought in great lines, but rather acted as small units less susceptible to fire. He pushed the idea that, since piercing the center of an army was no longer as much of a concern due to the deadly nature of modern rifles, they should worry less about artillery getting overrun and more about how effective it was in a fight. So he moved his artillery closer to the action, and had them working in conjunction with his units. He had a general staff, the only one in Europe, whose sole purpose was to draw up war plans in peacetime and think through all of the probable scenarios of coming conflicts.
Genius. Man, like, you just see why they become a force to be reckoned with, right? And yeah, this is just... You just see the evolution of warfare and just how, it's interesting just to see how the power dynamics always shift in Europe, One nation at one century, it's like the strongest, and then like in another, they lose, they're no longer the top dog in another nation, right? Like for a while, France was just unstoppable. They could solo all of Europe, and now it's like Prussia / Germany has risen so great that they are essentially soloing most of Europe by the time of World War II. It's just the constant power dynamics and shifts in Europe is just very amazing, and it's very interesting to look at. And this is just smart, like always one step ahead, always planning, always prepared. Just all the changes that the Prussians are making are just great.
With these advantages and a superiority in numbers, Moltke immediately took the offensive, rapidly pushing the French back across the border and charging into French territory. Time and again, the French reeled before the Prussian forces. Soon, the French armies were falling back, trying to link up with reserves further down the line. But the retreating army was spotted by a small cavalry brigade, and nearby Prussian forces were ordered to move in and cut them off. Unfortunately, due to some wild miscalculations by both sides, the Prussians had just sent 30,000 men to engage what turned out to be 130,000. The French were beleaguered and demoralized, but had an overwhelming advantage in men. The Prussians were ready for the fight, but ended up pinned by the French artillery. In desperation, the Prussian commander sent a message to a nearby cavalry commander, saying that the artillery must be cleared. Famously, the cavalry commander said, "It will cost what it will cost," and readied his men. Obscured by the terrain, they burst through the cannon smoke at the last minute, bearing down on the foe, giving them only 1,000 meters to react. The cavalry crashed into the artillery and tore through it, silencing the batteries that had so long hampered the Prussian army. This is arguably the last cavalry charge to significantly change the course of a battle in modern military history.
Yeah, that's insane, Like, it's so interesting, from all the videos we've watched on this channel, with so many different wars and campaigns, just to kind of watch it kind of, evolve war and change throughout the years. I will say, though, while cavalry charges are awesome, I am a little happy we're kind of done using animals. We're done killing horses and elephants. So, yeah, I am happy about that, but I won't lie if I didn't think, like, charging on horseback or riding an elephant wasn't kind of awesome, But, yeah, I guess if anything's cool about the advancement of warfare is, less animal harm and cruelty, So, yeah.
But even 1,000 meters is a long ride when you've got modern guns firing at you. Of the 800 horsemen who set out, only 420 made it back, and it turns out that Bismarck's son was among this regiment. It was late in the night of August 16th, 1870, when a messenger arrived to tell Bismarck his eldest son was dead. Quartered only 20 miles away from the battlefield, Bismarck rode like a man possessed to find the body of his son, only to be greeted by his very much alive son laughing and joking in a farmhouse nearby. He had
Oh, wait. Oh, wow.
taken a bullet to the leg and would be out of the fighting, but was in no mortal danger. After a few more
Was that a prank on his son's part, or that was just a mistranslation? If it was a prank, I'm like, that's an awful thing to do. Oh my goodness.
hard-fought victories, the Prussian forces bottled up the French at Metz and forced the surrender of 140,000 men. The French only had one army left to them, an army battered by an attempt to relieve the forces at Metz. But Moltke had no intention of letting this force get away, and in the days following the surrender at Metz, he maneuvered his forces and encircled this final army. A breakout attempt was made, but so exhausted and undersupplied were the French at this point, it soon became clear that a breakout was impossible. By the next day, 100,000 men, and with them the greatest prize of all, Napoleon III, who was personally leading this army, surrendered. France no longer had a real army on the field. Now it was time to think about the future. For Bismarck, that meant peace terms.
Yeah, the Franco-Prussian War, the events orchestrated by Bismarck, and just the way he managed to maneuver everything and outplay everyone is just so cunning and, like, amazing, I think. Like, you know, obviously the man just knows how to, like, play the game, and, like, no one is on his level at this point. Like, a genius through and through, and just wow.
Moltke, that meant pushing on to Paris.
So yes, we're gonna be looking at the final part next time about Germany. Yay, we're here. So I will be seeing you all in part 6. Bye everyone.